The guards thought he was just another homeless vagrant who had wandered onto Fort Bragg looking for a handout. They did not notice the way his eyes swept the room in a tactical pattern. They did not recognize the 1,000-yard stare that had seen more combat than most of them would experience in a lifetime. And they certainly did not know that the flag-draped coffin at the front of the chapel held his only son. Harold Beckett stood at the back of the memorial hall, 74 years old, with a gray beard that had not seen a razor in weeks and clothes that carried the particular wrinkles of a man who had slept outside more nights than he cared to count. His hands trembled slightly as he clutched a crumpled bus ticket stub, the last physical evidence of a 400-mile journey that had taken everything he had left to complete. Before we go any further, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you have witnessed how your community treats its veterans, the ones who came home changed, the ones who fell through the cracks. The chapel filled steadily with people who belonged there. Officers in dress uniforms with ribbons stacked across their chests. Special Forces operators with green berets tucked into their belts, their faces carrying the particular stillness of men who had seen things they would never discuss. A two-star general entered with a congressional delegation, their presence turning heads and straightening spines throughout the room. Harold pressed himself against the back wall, trying to become invisible. He had learned that skill well over the past several years. How to stand in a doorway without being noticed. How to sit on a bench without drawing attention. How to exist in spaces where people preferred not to see him. The program in his hand, retrieved from a stack by the door, told him everything and nothing at once. Master Sergeant Marcus Beckett, killed in action during a classified operation. Bronze Star, Purple Heart, 22 years of service to his country. 22 years. His boy had served for 22 years, and Harold had missed most of them. He had missed the promotions and the deployments and the quiet moments of pride that a father should witness. He had missed them because he had been too drunk, too broken, too ashamed to be part of his son's life. A woman in black took her seat in the front row. Rachel. He recognized her from photographs Marcus had sent years ago, before the silence settled between them like concrete. She was older now, grief etched into the lines around her eyes, but still beautiful. Still the woman his son had loved. Harold wondered if she knew he existed, if Marcus had ever mentioned the father who had failed him so completely. The honor guard entered with precision that made Harold's chest ache with recognition. He knew those movements, had performed them himself decades ago, when his body still worked the way it was supposed to, and his mind had not yet become a minefield of memories he could not escape. He stood straighter without thinking about it. Shoulders back, chin level, the ranger in him responding to the ritual even after all these years. A security officer near the door noticed. His eyes narrowed as he studied Harold, taking in the worn jacket and the unkempt beard and the boots that had walked too many miles. He leaned toward his partner and whispered something that made them both look in Harold's direction. Harold ignored them. He had come 400 miles to say goodbye to his son. He had given his last $5 to a young veteran at the bus station who looked hungrier than he felt. He had nothing left to give and nothing left to lose, and he was not leaving until he had seen this through. The chaplain took his position at the front of the room. The flag on the coffin caught the light streaming through stained glass windows, and Harold felt something crack open inside his chest. That was his boy in there. His Marcus, the child who had once fallen asleep in his arms, who had looked at him like he hung the moon, who had said he wanted to be just like his daddy when he grew up. And now Marcus was gone, and Harold had not spoken to him in 8 years, and all the apologies he had rehearsed on that long bus ride would never reach his son's ears. Colonel Vincent Ashford stepped to the side of the room, his uniform immaculate, his expression carrying the particular tension of a man responsible for ensuring everything proceeded perfectly. His eyes swept the chapel, checking details, confirming arrangements. When his gaze landed on Harold, it stopped, hardened. Harold watched the colonel signal to the security officers with a subtle gesture that most people would have missed. But Harold had spent 3 tours in Vietnam reading the body language of men who wanted to kill him. He recognized the silent command. They were going to try to remove him. He tightened his grip on the bus ticket stub in his pocket and felt the weight of the pocket watch against his chest. His father had carried that watch at Belowood. Harold had carried it through the Ie Drang Valley. He had hoped, once, to pass it to Marcus. The security officers began moving toward him, their path casual but deliberate. In the front row, one of the Special Forces operators turned around. Young, maybe 30, with the kind of eyes that had seen too much too soon. He studied Harold's face for a long moment, his expression shifting through confusion to recognition to something Harold could not quite identify. The young operator leaned toward the man beside him and whispered something urgent. 3 days earlier, Harold had been sitting on a cot in a VA homeless shelter in Richmond when a social worker named Patricia found him. She had a folder in her hands and an expression on her face that Harold recognized immediately. He had seen that look on chaplains in Vietnam, right before they delivered the worst news a soldier could receive. She sat down beside him and asked if he was Harold David Beckett. He said he was. She asked if he had a son named Marcus. He felt his heart stop beating for a moment before he nodded. Patricia told him as gently as anyone could tell a father that his child was dead. Killed in action. Details classified. Funeral at Fort Bragg in 3 days. Harold did not cry. He had used up most of his tears years ago, drowned them in bottles of whiskey that promised to make the memories stop. Instead, he sat very still and felt something inside him turn to stone. Marcus was gone. His boy was gone. And the last words between them had been spoken in anger 8 years ago, words that Harold had regretted every single day since. Now he stood in the back of a memorial chapel while security officers moved toward him and a colonel watched with cold eyes. The chaplain had begun speaking about sacrifice and service and the cost of freedom, words that washed over Harold without penetrating. He was thinking about the last time he had seen Marcus. His son had been 32 years old, already a staff sergeant, already on his way to becoming the soldier Harold had always known he could be. They had met at a diner outside Fort Benning because Marcus refused to be seen with his father on post. Harold had been sober for 3 weeks at that point. He remembered thinking it was a new beginning, a chance to rebuild what he had destroyed. But Marcus had not come to reconcile. He had come to say goodbye, to tell Harold that he could not keep waiting for his father to become someone he was never going to be, to explain that the shame of having a homeless alcoholic father was affecting his career, his relationships, his ability to be the soldier he needed to be. Harold had not handled it well. The old anger had risen up, the defensive rage that had protected him through 3 tours and 2 decades of nightmares. He had said things about Marcus being ashamed of where he came from, about forgetting who had taught him to be a man, about ingratitude and abandonment. Marcus had stood up from the table, looked at his father with eyes that held more sadness than anger, and said the words that had haunted Harold ever since. "I wish you had died in Vietnam, Dad. At least then I could have been proud of you." He had walked out of that diner and never looked back. 8 years of silence. 8 years of Harold wondering if his son was alive or dead, deployed or stateside, married or alone. 8 years of carrying a photograph of a 7-year-old boy in a Little League uniform, because that was the last time Marcus had looked at him with love instead of disappointment. The security officers reached him just as the chaplain finished his opening remarks. One of them, a young sergeant with a face that had not yet learned to hide its emotions, leaned close to Harold and spoke quietly. "Sir, you need to come with us." Harold did not move. His eyes remained fixed on the flag-draped coffin at the front of the room. The second officer, older and less patient, gripped Harold's elbow with fingers that pressed harder than necessary. "Sir, this is a private ceremony. You need to leave." Harold finally turned to look at them. He saw what they saw when they looked at him. A vagrant. A nobody. A problem to be removed so that important people could mourn in peace. "My son is in that box," Harold said quietly. The officers exchanged a glance that said they had heard every excuse a trespasser could offer. The older one shook his head. "Sir, Master Sergeant Beckett's family is already seated. You need to come with us now, or we will have to escort you out by force." Harold looked toward the front row. Rachel sat with her head bowed. Beside her were 2 teenagers he did not recognize. Grandchildren, he realized. Marcus had children, and Harold had never known. The chaplain continued speaking, his voice carrying through the chapel, but Harold could not hear the words anymore. There was a roaring in his ears, the same sound he used to hear before a firefight, his body preparing for a confrontation he could not avoid. Colonel Ashford appeared beside the security officers. His uniform was perfect, his bearing impeccable, his expression carrying the particular disdain of a man who had never experienced what it meant to fall. The colonel looked at Harold the way officers had looked at him 50 years ago when he came back from the jungle covered in mud and blood and things he could not name. Like he was something unpleasant that needed to be cleaned up. "I do not know how you got onto this installation," the colonel said, "but you are disrupting a ceremony honoring an American hero. You have 60 seconds to leave voluntarily, or you will be removed in handcuffs. Do you understand?" Harold understood. He understood that his son had become a hero, had earned medals and respect and the admiration of everyone in this room. He understood that he had become the opposite, a cautionary tale, a burden, an embarrassment. But he also understood that he had traveled 400 miles on buses and hitchhiked rides to be here, that he had not eaten in 2 days because he gave his last money to another forgotten veteran, that his son was dead, and this was his only chance to say goodbye. Harold straightened to his full height, shoulders back, chin level, and looked Colonel Ashford directly in the eyes. "I am not leaving." The colonel's face hardened. He turned to the security officers and gave a single sharp nod. "Remove him." The officers grabbed Harold's arms. The congregation turned to watch. And in the front row, the young Special Forces operator rose from his seat, his eyes locked on the confrontation unfolding at the back of the chapel. The security officers moved Harold toward the exit with the kind of efficient force that left no room for resistance. His worn boots scraped against the polished floor of the chapel as they half walked, half dragged him past rows of mourners who turned to watch the disturbance. Harold did not struggle. He had learned long ago that fighting only made things worse when you were outmatched and outnumbered. Instead, he kept his eyes forward, his jaw set, his dignity intact, even as they treated him like a criminal. The whispers started immediately. "Who is that? What's he doing here? Probably homeless. Look at him." Security should have caught him at the gate. "Disgraceful, disrupting a funeral like this." Each word landed like a small knife between Harold's ribs. These people had come to honor his son, and they looked at him like he was garbage that had blown in from the street. The young Special Forces operator who had risen from his seat took a step toward the aisle, but a hand from the soldier beside him held him back. "Protocol. Chain of command. Do not make a scene at a memorial service." Harold understood the calculation, even if he wished the outcome were different. Colonel Ashford followed the procession toward the door, ensuring his orders were carried out properly. The two-star general in the front row watched with a frown, but did not intervene. This was Ashford's installation, Ashford's responsibility, Ashford's problem to solve. They were nearly to the exit when a woman's voice cut through the murmuring crowd. "Wait." Rachel had turned in her seat, her face pale beneath her black veil. She was looking at Harold with an expression he could not quite read. Confusion, concern, something else underneath that he did not dare name. Colonel Ashford stopped, his irritation barely concealed beneath a mask of professional courtesy. "Ma'am, this man is a trespasser. We are handling the situation." Rachel stood, her movements slow and deliberate, the way people move when they're trying to make sense of something that does not add up. "Who is he?" The question hung in the air. Harold met her eyes and saw the exact moment when she noticed something familiar in his face. The shape of his jaw, the color of his eyes, features that had passed from father to son and now echoed back at her from this ruined stranger. But the recognition did not fully form. How could it? Marcus had told her his father was dead, had probably described a hero's death, something noble and clean, rather than admit the truth about the broken man who had raised him. Colonel Ashford stepped between them, blocking Rachel's view. "Ma'am, I assure you this individual is not on any guest list. He has no identification and no legitimate reason to be here. We are removing him for the safety and dignity of everyone in attendance." Rachel hesitated. Harold could see the war playing out behind her eyes. trust the colonel and return to mourning her husband, or trust her instincts and delay a ceremony that was already painfully difficult. The colonel made the decision for her. Please, ma'am, let us handle this. Your husband deserves a service without disruption. The word husband hit Harold like a physical blow. He had not known Marcus and Rachel were still married, had assumed, during all those years of silence, that the relationship had ended like everything else in his son's life that Harold had touched. Rachel sat down slowly, her eyes still searching Harold's face for an answer to a question she had not yet fully formed. The security officers pushed Harold through the door and into the harsh sunlight outside the chapel. The sudden brightness made him squint after the dim interior, and for a moment he was back in Vietnam, emerging from jungle darkness into a clearing where anything could be waiting. They marched him across the manicured grounds toward a small building marked security office. Inside, the air conditioning hit his skin like ice water. They pushed him into a plastic chair and told him to stay put while they figured out what to do with him. Through the window, Harold could see the chapel, could hear, faintly, the sound of music beginning, a hymn he recognized from his childhood, from a time before the war had hollowed him out and left him with nothing but memories he could not escape. They were singing for Marcus, honoring him, saying goodbye, and Harold was sitting in a security office like a criminal, close enough to hear, but forbidden from being present. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the photograph. Marcus at 7 years old, grinning at the camera with a gap-toothed smile, baseball bat over his shoulder, pure joy radiating from every pixel of the faded image. Harold had taken that picture himself, back when his hands were steady and his mind was clear and his son still believed he was a hero. The hymn ended. Silence. Then a voice began speaking, too distant for Harold to make out the words, but close enough for him to recognize the cadence of a eulogy. Someone was telling stories about Marcus, about the man he had become, about the soldier, the leader, the brother in arms who had earned the love and respect of everyone who served beside him. Harold pressed the photograph against his chest and listened to strangers describe his son. A door opened behind him. Heavy footsteps. Harold did not turn around. The footsteps stopped directly behind his chair. A long pause filled with something Harold could not identify. Then a voice, young but carrying weight beyond its years. You are him, are you not? The ranger from Drang. Harold turned slowly. The young Special Forces operator from the chapel stood in the doorway, his green beret now in his hands, his eyes fixed on Harold with an intensity that bordered on reverence. Marcus talked about you, the young man said. He told us his father was dead, but he also told us stories. About a ranger who saved 12 men in the Drang Valley. About a silver star. About a soldier who was the bravest man he ever knew. Harold said nothing. His throat had closed around words that refused to come. The operator took a step closer, studying Harold's face the way a man studies a map to confirm he has found what he was looking for. I have seen the photograph, he said quietly. The one Marcus kept in his footlocker. A little boy in a baseball uniform. He paused. You are carrying the same picture right now. Harold looked down at the photograph, still pressed against his chest. His hands were shaking. The young operator knelt beside Harold's chair, bringing himself to eye level with the old man who had been thrown out of his own son's funeral. My name is Staff Sergeant Devin Reyes. Marcus was my team leader, my brother, and I think you need to tell me who you really are. Harold looked at the young operator, kneeling beside him, and felt something shift in his chest. For years he had been invisible, a ghost moving through a world that had forgotten he existed. Now, someone was looking at him, truly looking and asking him to be seen. My name is Harold Beckett, he said. His voice cracked on the words. Marcus was my son. Reyes exhaled slowly, his suspicion confirmed, but the reality of it still settling into his bones. He stayed kneeling, as if standing would somehow break the fragile connection between them. He told us you were dead, Reyes said. Told us you died when he was young. A training accident at Fort Benning. He said he barely remembered you. Harold closed his eyes. The lie was a kindness, he realized. Easier for Marcus to invent a dead hero than explain a living failure. Easier to mourn a father who never existed than admit the real one was sleeping under bridges and begging for change. I might as well have been dead, Harold said quietly. I was not the father he needed. Had not been for a long time. Reyes studied him with eyes that had learned to read men in the most dangerous places on earth. He saw past the worn clothes and unkempt beard, past the trembling hands and weathered skin. He saw something that most people missed when they looked at Harold Beckett. He saw a soldier. Marcus kept a footlocker, Reyes said. Padlocked. Private. We all have them. Things we do not share with the team. After he was killed, the commander asked me to inventory his personal effects. Harold waited, afraid to breathe, afraid that any movement would stop the words coming from this young man who had known his son. There was a folder inside, Reyes continued. Newspaper clippings from 1965. After-action reports with portions redacted. A Silver Star citation for a Sergeant Harold Beckett, 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry. He paused. Idrang Valley. November 1965. Harold remembered. God help him, he remembered every moment of those 3 days. The screaming and the gunfire and the bodies of boys who should have been in college piling up around him. The decision to run toward the enemy position when every instinct screamed at him to hide. The 12 men he dragged to safety while bullets tore through the air around him. He remembered the medal they pinned on his chest and the hollow feeling in his stomach because medals did not bring back the dead. They did not silence the sounds that followed him home. They did not stop him from reaching for a bottle every time the memories became too loud to bear. Marcus found that citation when he was 15, Harold said. It was in a box in the attic. I had hidden it there because I could not stand to look at it. Reyes nodded slowly. He told us about that. Said he found proof that his father was a hero. Said that was the day he decided to enlist. The words hit Harold like a punch to the chest. All those years he had believed Marcus joined the army despite him. Because of a shame Harold had brought to their family. Because he wanted to redeem a name his father had tarnished. But Marcus had enlisted because of him. Because of a medal Harold had tried to forget. Because a 15-year-old boy had found evidence that his broken father had once been brave. Through the window, Harold could see people beginning to exit the chapel. The ceremony was ending. Soon they would fold the flag and present it to Rachel and lower his son into the ground. And Harold would not be there for any of it. Reyes stood abruptly, his decision made. Stay here, he said. Do not move. Do not let them take you off this base. He was gone before Harold could respond, moving with the urgent purpose of a man on a mission. The doors swung shut behind him, leaving Harold alone with the photograph and the weight of everything he had just learned. His son had been proud of him. Somewhere beneath the anger and the shame and the years of silence, Marcus had carried proof of his father's courage, had kept it locked away like a treasure, had built his entire career on the foundation of a story Harold had tried to bury. The security officers returned before Reyes did. The older one looked irritated, the younger one uncomfortable. Behind them, filling the doorway with his immaculate uniform and cold authority, stood Colonel Ashford. The ceremony is concluded, Ashford said. His voice carried the clipped efficiency of a man accustomed to being obeyed. You will be transported off this installation immediately. If you attempt to return, you will be arrested for trespassing. Harold stood slowly, his joints protesting after too long in the plastic chair. He faced the colonel with the same steadiness he had faced enemy fire half a century ago. That was my son, he said. My only child. I have not seen him in 8 years, and I will never see him again. All I wanted was to say goodbye. Ashford's expression did not change. Whatever sympathy might have existed in him had been buried beneath years of protocol and procedure and the absolute certainty that rules existed for a reason. I do not know who you are, the colonel said, and frankly I do not care. What I know is that you disrupted a memorial service for an American hero. You upset his widow. You created a scene in front of a 2-star general and members of Congress. His voice hardened. You're leaving this base. Now. The security officers moved forward to take Harold's arms. The door burst open behind them. Reyes stood in the entrance, breathing hard, his face flushed with exertion. But he was not alone. Behind him, her black dress still perfect but her composure beginning to crack, stood Rachel. And behind her, moving with the careful authority of someone who had just received information that changed everything, came Major General Catherine Cole. The general's eyes found Harold across the small room. She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she spoke 3 words that stopped Colonel Ashford cold. "I know him." Colonel Ashford turned to face the general, his confidence faltering for the first time since Harold had seen him. The presence of a 2-star officer in a security office was unusual enough. The words she had just spoken made it extraordinary. "Ma'am," Ashford began, "this individual was found trespassing during the memorial service. He has no identification and no verifiable connection to the deceased. I was simply following protocol to ensure the dignity of the ceremony." General Cole did not look at him. Her eyes remained fixed on Harold, studying his face with an intensity that suggested she was looking backward through time. "Fort Benning," she said quietly. 1987. You were a sergeant first class with a Ranger training brigade." Harold felt the memories surface through decades of fog. A young female captain, one of the first women to observe Ranger training exercises. A vehicle rollover during a night navigation course. Chaos and screaming and the smell of leaking fuel. "The Humvee," Harold said. "It flipped into the ravine." General Cole nodded slowly. "For soldiers trapped inside. Fuel everywhere. Everyone else was frozen, afraid the whole thing would ignite." She paused. "Except you." Harold remembered the heat of the engine against his hands as he pried open the crumpled door. The weight of unconscious bodies as he dragged them one by one up the muddy slope. The moment when the vehicle finally caught fire and he realized he had not gotten everyone out. He had gone back in. 3rd-degree burns on both arms. A collapsed lung from smoke inhalation. 3 weeks in a hospital and a second award recommendation that he had refused to accept. "I was just doing my job," Harold said. "You saved 4 soldiers that night," General Cole said. "One of them was me." The room went silent. Ashford's face drained of color as the implications settled over him like a shroud. He had just attempted to forcibly remove a man who had saved the life of the general, now standing in front of him. Rachel stepped forward, her eyes moving between Harold and the general. She still did not fully understand what was happening, but she understood enough to know that the vagrant she had dismissed earlier was something more than he appeared. "General," she said carefully, "what exactly is going on?" General Cole finally turned away from Harold to address the room. "This man is Harold Beckett, Silver Star recipient for valor in the Ia Drang Valley, 1965. He served 3 tours in Vietnam with the 75th Ranger Regiment." She let the words sink in before continuing. "He is also, unless I am very much mistaken, the father of Master Sergeant Marcus Beckett." Rachel's hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes went to Harold with a new kind of horror, not fear of a stranger, but the dawning recognition of something far more painful. "Marcus told me his father was dead," she whispered. "He said he died years ago." "He might as well have," Harold said. The words came out flat, emptied of self-pity by years of repetition. "I was not the father he deserved. He had every right to pretend I did not exist. But you came anyway," Reyes said from the doorway. "You came 400 miles to be here." Harold looked at the young operator who had seen through his disguise of poverty and recognized the soldier underneath. "He was my son. Nothing else mattered." General Cole turned to Colonel Ashford with an expression that could have frozen water in July. "Colonel, I want to be very clear about what has happened here today. You attempted to remove a decorated combat veteran from his own son's funeral. You did so without verifying his identity, without exercising basic human decency, and without considering for one moment that appearances can be deceiving." "Ma'am," Ashford stammered, "I had no way of knowing. He looked like a vagrant. He had no identification. I was trying to protect the integrity of the ceremony." "The integrity of the ceremony," General Cole repeated, her voice dropping to a dangerous register. "A ceremony honoring a soldier who died serving his country. And you thought the best way to protect that integrity was to drag his father out like a criminal." Ashford had no response. His career, so carefully constructed over decades of service, was crumbling in real time. General Cole turned back to Harold. Her voice softened, though her bearing remained military straight. "Mr. Beckett, I owe you my life. That debt has remained unpaid for nearly 40 years. She stepped closer to him, close enough that he could see the emotion she was fighting to control. "I cannot give you back the years you lost with your son. I cannot undo the mistakes that were made here today. But I can make sure you are treated with the respect you have earned." She turned to Reyes. "Staff Sergeant, please escort Mr. Beckett back to the chapel. The flag presentation has not yet occurred. His son's widow can decide whether she wants him present for that." All eyes turned to Rachel. She stood frozen, tears streaming down her face, caught between the husband who had lied to her for their entire marriage and the father-in-law she had never known existed. The man in front of her was a stranger. Homeless, broken, everything Marcus had tried to protect her from. But he was also the father of the man she had loved, the grandfather of children who did not know he existed, the missing piece of a family history that suddenly had a gaping hole at its center. Rachel wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and made a decision. "He should be there," she said quietly. Marcus would have wanted him there, even if he could never admit it. General Cole nodded and gestured toward the door. Reyes moved to Harold's side, offering a steadying hand that Harold accepted with gratitude. As they walked out of the security office and back toward the chapel, Harold heard Colonel Ashford's voice behind him, strained and desperate. "General, I was only following procedure." General Cole's response was quiet but carried clearly in the still air. "Sometimes, Colonel, procedure is not enough. Sometimes you have to see the human being standing in front of you." Harold kept walking. The chapel was ahead. His son's flag was waiting. And for the first time in 8 years, someone had seen him. The walk back to the chapel felt longer than the distance warranted. Harold moved slowly, his legs unsteady beneath him, while Reyes matched his pace without comment. Rachel walked ahead, her black dress catching the afternoon light, her shoulders carrying a weight that had doubled in the last 10 minutes. The congregation had not yet dispersed. Most remained in their seats, waiting for the flag presentation that would conclude the service. Whispers rippled through the room as Harold entered through the same door he had been dragged out of minutes earlier. The homeless vagrant was back, but now he walked beside a staff sergeant, followed by a 2-star general, and the widow herself had cleared the path. General Cole moved to the front of the chapel and spoke quietly with the officiating chaplain. Harold watched the clergyman's expression shift from confusion to surprise to something approaching wonder. He nodded several times, then stepped to the microphone. "Before we proceed with the presentation of the flag," the chaplain announced, "we have been informed of a development that requires acknowledgement." He paused, gathering his words carefully. "It appears that Master Sergeant Beckett's father is present with us today." The murmurs became a wave of sound that crashed through the chapel. Harold felt every eye in the room turned toward him, felt the weight of their stares pressing against his chest. He wanted to disappear, to fold into himself and become invisible again. But Reyes was beside him, and Rachel had turned back to look at him with an expression that was no longer confusion, but something closer to grief shared. "Many of you knew Marcus as a soldier," the chaplain continued, "as a leader, as a brother in arms. What you may not have known is that his father, Harold Beckett, is himself a decorated veteran, a Silver Star recipient who served 3 tours in Vietnam with the 75th Ranger Regiment." The whispers changed tenor. Harold could hear the recalculation happening in real time. Not a vagrant, a veteran, not a trespasser, a father. Harold Beckett saved 12 lives during the Battle of Ia Drang in 1965, the chaplain said. He served his country with honor and distinction. And today, after traveling 400 miles to be here, he was nearly prevented from attending his own son's funeral. The silence that followed was absolute. Harold saw faces turning toward Colonel Ashford, saw the realization spreading through the crowd. The security response they had witnessed was no longer a reasonable precaution. It was a shameful mistake. Rachel stepped forward and took Harold's hand. Her fingers were cold, trembling slightly, but her grip was firm. "Come with me," she said quietly. "You should be in the front." Harold let her lead him down the center aisle of the chapel. He passed rows of officers and operators and dignitaries, all of them watching him with expressions he could not read. Some looked embarrassed. Others looked moved. A few of the Special Forces soldiers nodded at him with the silent respect that warriors reserve for their own. They reached the front row. Rachel guided him to a seat beside her, beside the teenagers he now understood were his grandchildren. A boy of perhaps 16 and a girl a few years younger. They stared at him with wide eyes, trying to reconcile the grandfather they had been told was dead with the worn stranger sitting beside them. Rachel leaned close to them and spoke in a whisper Harold could barely hear. "This is your grandfather, your father's father. I will explain everything later. But right now, we're going to be a family." The girl reached out hesitantly and touched Harold's hand. Her fingers were small and warm against his weathered skin. She did not speak, but the gesture said everything. Harold felt something crack open inside him. The wall he had built over decades of isolation and shame, the armor that had protected him from feeling anything too deeply, began to crumble. He was sitting beside his grandchildren, children he had never known existed, children who were looking at him not with disgust or pity, but with curiosity and the tentative beginnings of connection. The chaplain returned to the microphone. "The flag that draped Master Sergeant Beckett's coffin will now be folded and presented to his family. This flag represents the gratitude of a nation for his service and sacrifice." The honor guard moved forward with ceremonial precision. 6 soldiers in dress uniforms positioned themselves around the coffin, 3 on each side. They began the ritual that Harold had witnessed more times than he could count, the careful folding that transformed a rectangular banner into a tight triangle of stars. 13 folds, each one carrying meaning, each one performed with reverence. Harold watched his son's flag being folded and remembered a different funeral. His own father, Korea veteran, buried with military honors in a small cemetery in West Virginia. Harold had been 20 years old, just back from his first tour, standing at attention while a flag was folded for a man who had never talked about the war but carried it in his eyes until the day he died. Now it was Marcus, his son, the boy who had wanted to be just like him, who had found his Silver Star citation and built an entire life around proving worthy of a father who could not prove worthy of himself. The folding was complete. The senior member of the honor guard held the triangular bundle against his chest and turned toward the front row. But instead of approaching Rachel, he looked to General Cole. She nodded once, giving permission for something that clearly deviated from the planned ceremony. The soldier walked past Rachel, past the grandchildren. He stopped directly in front of Harold. "On behalf of the President of the United States Army, and a grateful nation, please accept this flag as a symbol of our appreciation for your son's honorable and faithful service." Harold's hands shook as he reached out to accept the flag. The fabric was heavy, solid, real in a way that nothing had felt real in years. He pulled it against his chest and felt the weight of everything it represented. His son, his boy, the child he had failed and the man he had never known. Gone forever, but remembered, honored, loved. The tears came then. Harold Beckett, who had not cried since the day Marcus walked out of that diner 8 years ago, wept openly in the front row of his son's funeral. Rachel put her arm around him. His granddaughter pressed close to his side. And somewhere behind him, Harold heard the sound of others crying too. Not for Marcus alone, but for all of them. For everything that had been lost and could never be recovered. For the waste and the shame and the years that would never come back. And for the grace, unexpected and undeserved, of being seen at last. The reception was held in a hall adjacent to the chapel, a space filled with white tablecloths and photographs of Marcus at various stages of his career. Harold stood near the entrance, uncertain whether he belonged among the polished officers and grieving friends who filled the room. Rachel appeared at his side with a glass of water. "You need to drink something," she said. "When did you last eat?" Harold tried to remember. The bus station in Richmond, maybe. A vending machine sandwich that had cost him his last real meal money before he gave the rest to the young veteran outside. It does not matter, he said. It matters to me. Rachel's voice carried an edge that reminded Harold of his late wife. The same stubborn insistence on taking care of people whether they wanted it or not. She guided him toward a table in the corner, away from the crowds, and flagged down a server. Within minutes, Harold had a plate of food in front of him. He ate slowly, his shrunken stomach protesting the sudden abundance, while Rachel sat across from him and waited. He never told me, she finally said. 14 years of marriage, and he never once mentioned that his father was alive. Harold set down his fork. The food sat heavy in his stomach, mixing with guilt that never seemed to fade. Marcus was ashamed of me, he said, and he had every right to be. I was a drunk, a failure, everything he did not want to become. Rachel shook her head slowly. That is not the whole story, though, is it? I saw the way those soldiers looked at you. The general said you saved her life. The chaplain talked about the Ai Drang Valley like it was sacred ground. It was, Harold said quietly, for the men who died there. Rachel leaned forward, her eyes searching his face for answers to questions she was only beginning to form. Tell me, she said. Tell me who you really are. Who Marcus's father really was. Harold looked at the photographs on the walls. Marcus in dress uniform. Marcus with his team in some desert location. Marcus smiling, always smiling, as if the weight he carried never touched his face. I was 19 when I went to Vietnam, Harold began. Same age Marcus was when he enlisted. I thought I knew what war was. I thought I was prepared. He paused, gathering memories he had spent decades trying to bury. The Ai Drang Valley was the first major battle between American and North Vietnamese forces. November 1965. We were surrounded, outnumbered, taking casualties faster than we could count them. Boys I had trained with were dying all around me. Rachel listened without interrupting. This was not a story Marcus had ever told her. This was the history her husband had kept locked away, too painful or too precious to share. There was a moment, Harold continued, when I knew we were going to be overrun. The enemy was coming through the perimeter. Men were screaming. I saw a group of soldiers pinned down in a crater, wounded, unable to move. The lieutenant was dead. Nobody was giving orders. He stopped. The memory was so vivid he could smell the cordite and the blood, could hear the particular sound of bullets passing close enough to feel their heat. I did not think about it, he said. I just moved, grabbed the lieutenant's radio, called in coordinates for artillery support, and ran toward the crater. I do not remember how many trips I made. They told me later it was 12 men. 12 soldiers I carried or dragged back to our lines. Rachel's eyes were wet. How did you survive? Harold almost smiled. I have asked myself that question every day for 60 years. The men beside me were dying. I should have been one of them. But the bullets missed, and I kept moving, and when it was over, I was still standing. He looked down at his hands, still trembling slightly, permanently marked by age and hardship. They gave me a silver star, he said, put in a box with a fancy certificate. I hid it in the attic because every time I looked at it, I saw the faces of men who did not come home, men who deserved medals more than I did. And Marcus found it, Rachel said softly. He was 15. Harold's voice cracked. He came to me with that citation in his hands and looked at me like I was someone worth admiring. It was the last time he ever looked at me that way. What happened? Harold closed his eyes. The memories of what came after were harder than the memories of combat. War had rules. War made sense in its terrible way. What happened to Harold after the war followed no logic at all. The nightmare started, he said. The drinking. I cannot hold a job. Could not be the husband my wife needed or the father Marcus deserved. I tried. God knows I tried. But the war followed me home, and it never left. He opened his eyes and found Rachel crying silently across the table. By the time Marcus was 17, I was sleeping on friends' couches more than I was sleeping at home. His mother covered for me as long as she could, but Marcus knew. He knew his father was broken. Rachel reached across the table and took his hand. The last time I saw him, Harold said, I was drunk. We were at a diner, and I was supposed to be getting better, but I was not. He told me he was done. He said words that I have heard every night since in my dreams. He cannot repeat them. The wound was still too fresh, even after 8 years. I do not blame him, Harold said. I blame myself. For every drink I took instead of being his father. For every time I chose the bottle over my son. For becoming someone he had to pretend was dead just to live with the shame. Rachel squeezed his hand tighter. He kept your Silver Star citation, she said. He kept that photograph of himself as a little boy. He built his entire career trying to be the soldier you were before the war broke you. Harold felt the tears threatening again. And I never got to tell him I was sorry, he whispered. I never got to tell him I was proud. I never got to say any of the things a father should say to his son. Rachel stood and moved around the table. She sat beside him and put her arm around his shoulders, holding him the way she might hold one of her children. Then tell me, she said, tell me everything you would have said to him, and I will make sure your grandchildren know. I will make sure Marcus's memory includes his father, the real one, not the ghost he invented. Harold was still sitting with Rachel when Colonel Ashford approached their table. The man moved differently now, his earlier confidence replaced by something that looked almost like fear. His uniform was still immaculate, but the person wearing it seemed diminished. Mrs. Beckett, Ashford said, his voice carefully controlled. Mr. Beckett, I was hoping I might have a word. Rachel's expression hardened. She had learned enough in the past hour to understand exactly what this man had done, and forgiveness was not yet on the table. Harold studied the colonel's face. He had seen that expression before, on soldiers who had made mistakes that cost lives, who had given orders that turned out to be wrong. The weight of error pressed visibly against Ashford's shoulders. Say what you came to say, Harold said. Ashford pulled out a chair and sat without being invited. For a long moment, he simply stared at the table, gathering words that clearly did not come easily. My father was a Vietnam veteran, he finally said. 1st Cavalry Division. He came home in 1968. Harold waited. The 1st Cavalry had been at Ia Drang. They had bled together in that valley, men from different units bound by the same nightmare. He was not the same when he returned, Ashford continued. My mother said he was a different person, angry, distant. He drank to stop the nightmares, and the drinking made everything worse. The parallel was so obvious that Harold could see where this story was heading. He had lived some version of it himself. By the time I was 10, he was gone more than he was home. Ashford's voice dropped lower. By the time I was 15, he was living on the streets in Baltimore. My mother told people he had died in the war. It was easier than explaining the truth. Rachel's expression shifted slightly, anger giving way to something more complicated. I joined the army to prove I was nothing like him, Ashford said. Built my career on discipline and control, on never letting the chaos win. He finally looked up at Harold. When I saw you in that chapel, I did not see a veteran. I saw my father. I saw everything I had spent my life running from. Harold understood. The recognition was painful but familiar. What happened to him? Harold asked. Your father. Ashford's jaw tightened. He died alone in a shelter in 1994. I did not find out until 3 months later. Did not go to the funeral. Did not claim the body. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. I told myself he was already dead to me, that I had buried him years ago. The silence stretched between them. Harold saw the colonel's hands trembling slightly against the white tablecloth. When I saw you today, Ashford said, something happened. I cannot explain it. All that anger I had carried for my father came rushing back. I looked at you and saw him. Saw the man who abandoned us. The man I swore I would never become and never forgive. He took a breath that shuddered in his chest. I was wrong. What I did today was unforgivable. I let my own demons turn me into exactly the kind of man I despised. I treated you like garbage because I could not face what you represented. Harold listened to the words and felt something unexpected. Not anger, not satisfaction at seeing his tormentor brought low. Something closer to recognition, to kinship. The war does not end when you come home, Harold said quietly. It follows you. It changes you. And sometimes it breaks the people around you without them even knowing why. Ashford looked at him with eyes that glistened in the reception hall light. How do you live with it? He asked. The guilt, the shame, knowing you destroyed the people who loved you. Harold considered the question. It was one he had asked himself every day for decades. You do not live with it, he said. You survive it, one day at a time. And if you're very lucky, you get a chance to make some small piece of it right before the end. He looked toward the corner of the room where his grandchildren sat together, the boy showing his sister something on his phone, both of them occasionally glancing toward the grandfather they had just discovered existed. I will never get back the years I lost with my son, Harold said. I will never hear him say he forgives me. But I can be here now. I can try to be something for his children that I failed to be for him. Ashford nodded slowly. The confession had cost him something. That much was clear. His career was likely over. His reputation among his peers was destroyed. But something in his face suggested that a different kind of weight had been lifted. I'm going to resign my commission, Ashford said. What I did today proved I am not fit to lead soldiers. Not when I cannot see past my own damage. That is your choice, Harold said. But running away from the uniform will not fix what is broken inside you. I know. I tried. Then what do? Harold thought about all the years he had wasted. The shelters and the streets and the endless gray days when existence felt like punishment. He thought about the moment Patricia had told him Marcus was dead, and the 400 miles he had traveled to be here, and the grace he had found in the most unexpected place. You find a way to help someone else, Harold said. Someone who is where you were. Where I was. You take the pain and you turn it into something useful. That is the only redemption I know. Ashford sat with those words for a long moment. Then he stood, straightened his uniform out of habit, and extended his hand to Harold. I'm sorry, he said. For today. For all of it. I cannot undo what I did, but I can promise you I will spend the rest of my life trying to be better. Harold took his hand. The grip was firm, two soldiers acknowledging something that did not require words. Ashford turned to Rachel. Mrs. Beckett, your husband was one of the finest soldiers I ever served with. I dishonored his memory today, and I will carry that shame forever. I hope someday you might find it in yourself to forgive me. Rachel did not respond immediately. The wound was still too fresh. But she nodded once, a small acknowledgement that forgiveness might someday be possible. Ashford walked away, his footsteps echoing in the crowded room. Harold watched him go and felt the strange lightness that comes from unexpected understanding. The man who had tried to throw him out of his son's funeral was not a monster. He was a broken son, just like Harold had been a broken father. Both of them casualties of wars that never really ended. The reception began to thin as afternoon turned toward evening. Dignitaries departed with handshakes and murmured condolences. The congressional delegation left in a motorcade of black vehicles. But the people who had truly known Marcus remained, gathered in small clusters throughout the hall, sharing stories and memories. Reyes found Harold standing alone near a display of photographs, studying an image of Marcus in full combat gear somewhere in the mountains of Afghanistan. He talked about you more than he realized, Reyes said, stepping up beside him. Never by name, never directly, but the stories were always there. Harold did not take his eyes off the photograph. His son looked confident in the image, capable, exactly the kind of soldier Harold had once been before the war hollowed him out. What kind of stories? Reyes smiled slightly. He used to tell us about a ranger who held a position alone for 6 hours during a firefight. We thought it was just legend, something passed down through the regiment. He paused. It was you, was it not? Harold said nothing. The memory of that day was buried deep, tangled with so many other moments of violence and survival. He told us about a soldier who carried his wounded lieutenant 2 miles through enemy territory. Reyes continued. About a man who refused a battlefield commission 3 times because he said he belonged with his men, not above them. Those are different times, Harold said quietly. Different wars. Reyes shook his head. Same courage. Same sacrifice. Marcus built his entire career trying to live up to those stories, trying to become the soldier his father had been. The weight of those words pressed against Harold's chest. All those years he had believed Marcus was running away from him, escaping the shame of a failed father. Instead, his son had been running toward something, chasing the ghost of a hero who had disappeared into a bottle and never come back. The other members of Marcus's team began to gather around them. 6 men in total, each one carrying the particular bearing of Special Forces operators. They had removed their berets and loosened their ties, but the discipline remained in their posture and their eyes. One of them, an older master sergeant with gray at his temples, stepped forward. "Mr. Beckett," he said, "my name is Thomas Hendricks. I served with your son for 9 years." Harold turned to face him. The man's eyes held the same 1,000-yard stare that Harold saw in his own mirror. "Marcus saved my life in Kandahar," Hendricks continued. "IED took out our vehicle. I was trapped, fuel leaking everywhere. He pulled me out, same as you pulled those men out at Iadrang." He paused. He told me afterward that he learned courage from his father. I did not understand what he meant until today. Another operator spoke up, a younger man with a scar running along his jawline. He kept a footlocker none of us were allowed to open. We used to joke about what was inside. Love letters, maybe embarrassing photos. He shook his head. "It was everything about you. Every article, every citation, every scrap of information he could find about your service." Harold felt his legs weaken. Reyes steadied him with a hand on his elbow. "Your son was not ashamed of you," Reyes said firmly. "He was trying to protect you. In his own way, he thought keeping you hidden would keep you safe, keep you from being judged by people who did not understand. But I was ashamed of myself," Harold said. "That was always the problem. I cannot see past my own failure long enough to see what Marcus was really doing." Hendricks reached into his pocket and withdrew a worn envelope. "We found this in his quarters after he was killed," he said. "It was with his personal effects, sealed, with instructions to deliver it if anything happened to him." He held the envelope out to Harold. The paper was creased and soft, as if Marcus had handled it many times before finally sealing it shut. Harold's hands trembled as he took it. His name was written on the front in his son's handwriting. The letters were careful, deliberate, the penmanship of a man who had thought long and hard about what he wanted to say. He opened the envelope slowly, afraid of what he might find inside. A single sheet of paper, folded twice, covered in dense writing. The words blurred as Harold began to read, tears filling his eyes before he reached the second line. "Dad, if you are reading this, then I did not make it home. And if you're reading this, then someone found you. I am glad. I am so glad." Harold's breath caught in his throat. "I have written this letter 100 times and never sent it. I was too proud, too stubborn, too much like you, I guess. But I need you to know some things, and I am running out of chances to say them." The operators stood in respectful silence as Harold read. They had already seen the letter. They knew what it contained. "I never stopped loving you, Dad. Not for one day. I was angry for a long time. Angry that you could not be the father I needed. Angry that the war took you from me before I ever really had you. But underneath all that anger was a little boy who just wanted his dad back." Harold wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. The words continued, filling the page with everything Marcus had never been able to say out loud. "I told people you were dead because it was easier than explaining, easier than watching them judge you, easier than admitting that I failed you too. Because I did fail you, Dad. I walked away when you needed me most. I told myself I was protecting my career, my family, my sanity. But the truth is I was scared. Scared of becoming you. Scared of the darkness that took you." The letter went on, detailing Marcus's plans. How he had hired a private investigator to find Harold 6 months ago. How he had learned about the shelters and the streets and the endless struggle to survive. How he had been waiting for the right moment to reach out. "This deployment is my last one," the letter read. "When I get back, I am coming to find you. I do not care what you look like or where you're living or what has happened since we last spoke. You're my father, and I'm finally ready to bring you home." Harold read the final lines through a blur of tears. "I never stopped being proud to be your son, Dad. I just forgot how to say it. But I'm coming home. I'm finally coming home." He lowered the letter and looked at the men who had served beside his son. Warriors who had trusted Marcus with their lives. Brothers who had loved him. "He was coming for me," Harold whispered. "He was going to find me." Reyes nodded. He talked about it constantly those last few weeks. Said he had made peace with it. Said it was time. Harold pressed the letter against his chest, holding it the way he had held the flag, the way he wished he could have held his son one last time. Marcus had not abandoned him, had not erased him out of shame. His son had been building toward reconciliation, gathering courage for a reunion that would never happen. And now, standing in a room full of strangers who had become family, Harold understood that Marcus had found another way to bring him home after all. The reception hall had nearly emptied when Rachel approached Harold with a small cardboard box in her arms. Her eyes were red from crying, but something had shifted in her expression. The initial shock had given way to a kind of determined purpose. "These are his personal effects," she said. "The army sent them after he was killed. I could not bring myself to open the box until today." She sat on the table in front of Harold. The cardboard was plain, government issue, stamped with official markings and sealed with tape that had yellowed slightly in the weeks since Marcus died. "I think you should be the one to go through it," Rachel said. "I think you would have wanted that." Harold looked at the box. Such a small container for an entire life. Everything his son had carried with him into his final mission, reduced to whatever fit inside these cardboard walls. "Are you sure?" Rachel nodded. "The kids and I will have the rest of our lives to remember him. You should have this." She stepped back, giving him space, and Harold carefully broke the seal. Inside, the contents were arranged with military precision. Dog tags, a watch with a cracked face stopped at the moment of impact, a worn leather wallet, a small notebook filled with dense handwriting, and beneath it all, a photograph in a simple frame. Harold lifted the photograph and felt his heart stop. It was the picture he had taken of Marcus at 7 years old, the Little League portrait with the gap-toothed smile and the baseball bat over his shoulder. But in the background, visible on a desk behind Marcus's shoulder, was another frame. Harold had to look closely to make it out. It was his Silver Star citation. Marcus had kept both photographs together, father and son, linked across decades of silence by the same image of childhood innocence. "He kept it with him," Reyes said from somewhere behind Harold. "On every deployment, every mission," said it reminded him what he was fighting for. Harold set the photograph down carefully and picked up the notebook. The pages were filled with Marcus's handwriting, dates and locations, and fragments of thought recorded over years of service. He flipped to a random page and read, "Kandahar Province. 3rd week. Lost Henderson today. IED en route Tampa. I keep thinking about Dad, about how he must have felt losing men in Vietnam. The guilt never goes away. You just learn to carry it." Harold turned more pages. "Stateside training. Fort Bragg. Saw a homeless vet outside the gate today. Gray beard, old jumble boots, the look. Could have been Dad. Gave him $50 and could not stop shaking for an hour afterward. When does it stop hurting?" The entries spanned years. Dozens of them mentioned Harold, sometimes directly, sometimes obliquely. A son processing his complicated love for a father who had failed him and saved him in equal measure. Another entry, dated just 3 weeks before Marcus was killed. "Found him. PI located Dad in a shelter in Richmond. Alive. I did not expect to feel relief this strong. Part of me was sure he was already dead. Now I have to figure out what to say. How do you apologize for 8 years of silence? How do you tell your father you love him when you spent so long pretending he did not exist?" Harold closed the notebook. The words were too raw, too intimate to read in front of others. He would save them for later, for the long nights when he needed to hear his son's voice again. Rachel sat down beside him. "I had no idea," she said softly. "He never told me any of this. I thought he had made peace with losing you. I did not know he was carrying this much pain." "He was protecting you," Harold said, "same as he was protecting me. That was Marcus, always taking care of everyone else." Rachel reached into the box and pulled out the wallet. She opened it carefully, revealing the contents. Military ID, a few worn bills, credit cards that would never be used again, and tucked behind the ID, another photograph. This one Harold had never seen. It showed a young Marcus, maybe 19 or 20, in his army dress uniform. He was standing beside an older man in civilian clothes, both of them squinting into the sun. The older man was Harold, captured in a moment he barely remembered, a brief period of sobriety when he had attended Marcus's graduation from basic training. "I did not know this existed," Harold whispered. "He must have kept it hidden," Rachel said, "with everything else he could not talk about." Harold stared at the photograph. He looked almost healthy in the image, almost like the man he had been before the war consumed him. And Marcus looked proud, genuinely proud, to be standing beside his father. The evidence was overwhelming now. Years of artifacts and letters and hidden photographs, all pointing to the same truth. Marcus had never stopped loving him, had never truly let go, no matter what words had passed between them in that diner 8 years ago. General Cole appeared at the edge of their table. "Mr. Beckett," she said, "I have made some calls. The VA has a residential treatment program in Fayetteville, not far from here. They have agreed to accept you immediately with full benefits and support." Harold looked up at her. The offer was more than he had dared to hope for. A roof, medical care, a chance to address the demons that had driven him to the streets. "You do not have to decide right now," General Cole continued. "But the bed is yours if you want it. It is the least I can do for the man who saved my life." Harold considered the offer. For years he had refused help, convinced he did not deserve it, certain that his failures had disqualified him from redemption. But sitting here, surrounded by his son's legacy, holding the evidence of a love that had never died, something shifted inside him. Marcus had been coming to save him, had been building toward a rescue mission that would have brought Harold back from the wilderness of his own making. His son could not complete that mission, but Harold could honor it by saving himself. "I will take it," he said. The words felt strange in his mouth, unfamiliar after so many years of refusing everything. "I will take the help." General Cole nodded, a small smile breaking through her military composure. "Good," she said. "Marcus will be proud." Harold looked at the photograph in his hands. Father and son, frozen in a moment of connection that had somehow survived everything that came after. "I hope so," he said quietly. "I really hope so." 1 month later, Harold stood at the edge of Section 60 in Arlington National Cemetery. The morning air was cold, carrying the sharp clarity of early winter, and the rows of white headstones stretched before him like a geometry of loss. He was wearing new clothes, clean slacks, and a warm jacket provided by the VA program that had become his home. His beard was trimmed. His hands, while still marked by years of hardship, no longer trembled the way they once had. The headstone in front of him was still bright, not yet weathered by seasons of rain and sun. Master Sergeant Marcus David Beckett, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, beloved son, husband, father, brother. Harold had asked them to add one more word. They had agreed. "So," he knelt on the cold grass and placed his hand against the marble. "I read your notebook," he said quietly. "Every page, every entry. I know how much you struggled with what happened between us. I know how much it cost you to keep loving me when I gave you so little reason to." The wind moved through the bare trees that lined the cemetery. Somewhere in the distance, a bugler was playing taps for another funeral, another family saying goodbye to someone they loved. "I'm sober now," Harold continued. 32 days. They say the first month is the hardest, but I think they are wrong. I think the hardest part is learning to live with yourself when the fog clears and you can see everything you destroyed. He paused, gathering words that still felt awkward after a lifetime of silence. "Rachel brings the kids to visit me every Sunday. Your daughter has your eyes. Your son has your stubborn streak. They call me Grandpa now. Can you believe that? After everything, they call me Grandpa." A small laugh escaped him, mixed with something that might have been a sob. "I told them stories about you, about the boy you were before I ruined everything. Rachel fills in the rest, the man you became. Together we are giving them a complete picture, the whole truth. They deserve that." He shifted his weight on the cold ground, his knees protesting the position but unwilling to stand just yet. "Reyes and the team check on me too. They do not have to. I am nobody to them. But they said you would have wanted them to keep an eye on me, and I suppose they are right. They are good men. I understand why you love them." Harold reached into his pocket and withdrew the pocket watch. The brass casing was worn smooth by generations of hands. His grandfather at Below Wood, his father in Korea, Harold in Vietnam. It should have gone to Marcus, then to Marcus's children. The chain of inheritance broken by war and silence. "I'm going to give this to your son," Harold said, "when he is old enough. I will tell him it belonged to his great-great-grandfather, that it has been carried by Beckett men in every American war since 1918. And I will tell him it is his responsibility now to carry it forward. He placed the watch against the headstone for a moment, metal touching marble, connecting the living and the dead. The chaplain at the VA asked me if I believe in forgiveness. I told him I was not sure anymore. Too many years of not forgiving myself for anything. But he said something that stuck with me. Harold closed his eyes, remembering the conversation. He said forgiveness is not about deserving. It is about accepting grace, even when you have not earned it. He said your letter was a form of grace, a gift I did not deserve, but was given anyway. A cardinal landed on a nearby headstone, its red feathers bright against the gray morning. Harold watched it for a moment before continuing. I'm trying to accept it, son. I'm trying to believe that you meant what you wrote, that you never stopped being proud to be my son. Some days it feels impossible. Other days I read your words again, and I can almost believe them. He stood slowly, brushing grass from his knees. Colonel Ashford resigned his commission. You probably would have heard about it through the grapevine. He volunteers at a veterans shelter in Fayetteville now. I see him sometimes when he comes by the VA for outreach events. We do not talk much, but there's an understanding between us. Two broken men trying to put the pieces back together. Harold straightened his jacket and looked around at the endless rows of graves. So many names, so many stories, so many families left behind to carry the weight of sacrifice. General Cole is pushing for better veteran support programs. She uses what happened at your funeral as an example. Says if a decorated combat veteran can be treated like a vagrant at his own son's memorial service, then the system has failed. She is fighting to fix it. I think she might actually succeed. He turned back to the headstone. I cannot give you back what I took, Marcus. I cannot undo the years of absence or the pain I caused. But I can try to live the rest of my life in a way that honors you. That honors the soldier you were and the son you remained even when I gave you every reason to walk away. Harold placed his hand on the cold marble one final time. I love you, son. I should have said it more. I should have said it every day. But I am saying it now, and I will keep saying it until I see you again. He stepped back from the grave. The sun was beginning to break through the clouds, casting long shadows across the cemetery. I'm going to be okay, Harold said. It will take time. There will be hard days ahead. But I'm going to make it, because you gave me a reason to try. He turned and walked slowly toward the cemetery entrance, where Rachel waited with the children. They had driven up from Fayetteville to join him for this visit, the first of many they had already planned. His granddaughter ran to meet him, her small hand finding his. Are you okay, Grandpa? Harold looked down at her, at the eyes that held so much of Marcus in them, at the future that he had almost missed entirely. I am now, sweetheart. I am now. The ceremony was held in a private room at the Special Forces Association headquarters in Fayetteville. No press, no politicians, just the men who had served beside Marcus and the family he had left behind. Harold sat in the front row wearing a suit that Rachel had helped him pick out. It was the first suit he had owned in over a decade, and the fabric felt strange against skin accustomed to layers of worn cotton and donated jackets. His grandchildren sat on either side of him, their presence a comfort he had not known he needed. Reyes stood at the podium, dressed in his Class A uniform, the green beret positioned precisely on his head. Behind him, a display showed photographs of Marcus throughout his career. Beside the display sat a shadow box containing medals, patches, and a folded American flag. We are here today to honor two soldiers, Reyes began. Master Sergeant Marcus Beckett, who gave his life in service to this nation, and Sergeant Harold Beckett, who showed us what it means to never surrender, even when the battle seems lost. Harold shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He had not asked for recognition, had not wanted attention drawn to himself. But Reyes and the team had insisted, and Rachel had convinced him that accepting their gratitude was part of his healing. Most of you know the story by now, Reyes continued. How Harold traveled 400 miles to attend his son's funeral. How he was nearly thrown out by people who could not see past his appearance. How he stood his ground with the same courage that earned him the Silver Star 60 years ago. The operators in the room nodded. They had all heard the story. Some had witnessed it firsthand. What you may not know is what Harold taught us that day. He taught us that the uniform does not make the soldier. That service does not end when you take off the boots. That the men and women who fight our wars deserve our respect regardless of where life takes them afterward. Reyes paused, his eyes finding Harold in the front row. Marcus spent his entire career trying to live up to his father's legacy. He kept that legacy hidden, locked away, because he did not know how to reconcile the hero his father had been with the man his father became. But standing here today, looking at Harold Beckett, I finally understand what Marcus always knew. He stepped out from behind the podium. His father never stopped being a hero. The war just made it harder to see. Reyes walked to where Harold sat and extended his hand. Harold rose slowly, uncertain what was expected of him. On behalf of the Special Forces community, Reyes said, "I would like to present you with our unit coin. This coin represents brotherhood. It means that wherever you go, whatever happens, you are one of us. You are family." He pressed a heavy bronze coin into Harold's palm. The metal was warm from Reyes's grip, engraved with the Special Forces crest and the motto that had guided them through countless missions. De opressor liber, to free the oppressed. Harold looked at the coin, then at the faces of the men who had served with his son. Warriors who had seen the worst humanity had to offer and still chose to stand in the gap. They were looking at him not with pity, but with respect, with recognition. "I do not deserve this," Harold said, his voice rough with emotion. Hendricks stood up from his seat. "With respect, sir, you do not get to decide that. Marcus believed in you. He spent 22 years trying to become you. The least we can do is honor the man our brother loved." One by one, the operators rose to their feet. A standing ovation for a homeless veteran who had crashed a funeral and refused to leave. Harold felt tears sliding down his cheeks. He did not try to stop them. Rachel stood and put her arm around him. The children pressed close. And for a moment, surrounded by strangers who had become family, Harold felt something he had not experienced in decades. He felt like he belonged. The formal ceremony ended, but no one moved to leave. Instead, the room transformed into something more intimate. Stories were shared, laughter mixed with tears. Harold listened as men described missions Marcus had led, lives he had saved, moments of courage and humor and humanity that painted a picture of the son Harold had missed. He shared stories, too, about Marcus as a boy, before the estrangement, before the silence. About teaching him to throw a baseball and helping him with homework and watching him grow from a gap-toothed child into a young man determined to serve. The stories wove together, past and present, father and son, filling in the gaps that years of separation had created. As the evening wound down, Harold's grandson tugged at his sleeve. "Grandpa, can I ask you something?" Harold looked down at the boy who carried so much of Marcus in his features. "Anything." The boy hesitated, gathering courage the way children do when they are about to ask something important. "Were you scared? When you went to Dad's funeral and they tried to make you leave, were you scared they would win?" Harold considered the question carefully. The boy deserved an honest answer. "I was terrified," he admitted. "I had lost almost everything. Your father was the last piece of family I had left, and I could not even say goodbye properly. I thought they were going to take that from me, too. But you stayed anyway." Harold nodded. Sometimes courage is not about being brave. It is about being too stubborn to quit. Your father taught me that, even when he was not speaking to me, he never quit on anything in his life. I figured I owed him the same. The boy absorbed this, turning it over in his mind. "I want to be like that," he said finally. "Like you and Dad. I want to be brave even when I'm scared." Harold put his hand on his grandson's shoulder. "You already are," he said. "You are a Beckett. Courage is in your blood." Later, after the guests had gone and Rachel had taken the children to the car, Harold stood alone in the empty room. The photographs of Marcus still glowed on the display screen. The shadow box sat waiting to be transported to Rachel's home. Harold reached into his pocket and withdrew the letter Marcus had written. He had read it so many times now that the creases were wearing thin, the paper soft as cloth. "I never stopped being proud to be your son, Dad. I just forgot how to say it. But I'm coming home. I am finally coming home. Harold folded the letter and pressed it against his heart. You did come home, son, he whispered. You brought me home too. He turned off the display, gathered the shadow box in his arms, and walked out into the night. Rachel and the children were waiting in the car, warm light spilling from the windows. His family, his future, his reason to keep going. If this story moved you, drop a comment and let us know what resonated most. Maybe you have known a veteran who struggled to find their way home. Maybe you understand what it means to seek forgiveness that comes too late. Or maybe you just needed to remember that it is never too late to be seen, to be loved, to belong. Harold climbed into the car. His granddaughter immediately snuggled against his side. His grandson showed him something on his phone, chattering about school and friends and all the ordinary things that make up a life. Rachel caught his eye in the rearview mirror and smiled. Ready to go home? Harold looked at the faces around him, at the family Marcus had given him, at the second chance he had never expected to receive. Yeah, he said, I am ready. The car pulled away from the curb, carrying Harold Beckett toward a future he had finally learned to believe in.